"Daddy, look at that lady. She looks just like Mommy," an 8-year-old boy exclaimed, tugging urgently at his father's coat sleeve. Michael Harrison, the powerful CEO of one of Chicago's top tech firms, had just stepped out of a luxurious 5-star restaurant with his son, Tommy, when the world as he knew it seemed to tilt. Sitting on the sidewalk just across the street was a woman in tattered clothes, holding a small cardboard sign asking for help. Her face wasn't just familiar, it was an exact copy of Sarah's. Sarah, his wife, who had died from cancer 3 years ago. Michael froze in place. His legs suddenly felt like rubber, and his heart thundered in his chest. How could this be? How could a woman living on the streets have her face? It wasn't a resemblance, it was her. Every detail was perfectly the same. Same sharp jawline, same soft brown eyes. Even the slight curve of her lips when she smiled at a stranger who dropped a coin into her cup. Michael gripped Tommy's hand tightly, not daring to blink as he stared. The woman, completely unaware of the emotional chaos she was causing, quietly sifted through a plastic bag by her side. On that chilly Chicago evening, 34-year-old Kesha Williams had no idea her life was about to change. She had been surviving on the streets since she was 15, after running away from her final foster home where the abuse had been too much to bear. For 2 decades, the city's alleyways and shelters had been her only home. She had grown used to being invisible, ignored, dismissed, treated as less than human. But now, for the first time in years, someone was looking at her. And not just any someone, a wealthy, sharply dressed man, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. His young son pointed with wide eyes, stunned. "Sir? Are you all right?" A security guard from the restaurant asked, watching Michael stand motionless in the middle of the sidewalk. Michael blinked, trying to ground himself. No, this can't be happening. Sarah had always said she was an only child. Her parents had confirmed it after the funeral. There were no secret siblings. No lost twin. And yet, the woman before him had the same gentle tilt of the head. The same expressive brows, the same essence. It was like Sarah had come back, but with a life he couldn't have imagined. "Daddy, why are you crying?" Tommy asked softly, tugging his sleeve again. Michael hadn't even realized tears were falling. He'd spent 20 years building an empire, dominating Wall Street, making decisions that shaped industries. And now, a chance encounter on the street was unraveling him completely. Kesha sensed the tension and finally glanced up. Her tired eyes met his, and something shifted. In his stare, she saw something different. Recognition. Not disgust. Not pity. But a strange, deep knowing. It sent a chill down her spine. Michael stepped closer, his voice cracking. "Excuse me, may I ask your name?" Kesha instinctively pulled back. Men in suits usually didn't approach her with good intentions. "Kesha," she replied warily, her muscles ready to flee. "Kesha Williams?" She froze. Her heart skipped a beat. No one had called her by her full name in years. Out here, she was just Kay. Nothing more. Michael's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone and brought up a photo. Sarah, radiant in a blue dress, smiling at the camera. "Do you know this woman?" he asked. Kesha stared at the screen. Her breath caught. It was her, only polished and glowing. Same eyes. Same lips. Same everything. Her knees weakened as the realization hit. This wasn't coincidence. This was something much deeper. Who is she?" Kesha asked, her voice barely a whisper, trembling from a place she didn't even understand. "She was my wife," Michael replied, kneeling down so he could look her in the eye. "She passed away 3 years ago. And you look exactly like her." On a crowded Chicago sidewalk, where hundreds of people rushed past without a glance, 2 lives, one from privilege, the other from hardship, collided in a way neither of them could have imagined. What Michael didn't know then was that some truths, no matter how buried, have the power to shake the foundation of everything you believe in. If your heart is racing with this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe, because what happens next will uncover decades-old secrets that were never meant to see the light. 3 days after that encounter, Michael couldn't focus on anything else. His company, his meetings, even his meals, all were distractions he couldn't care less about. He'd hired James Mitchell, the most trusted private investigator in Chicago, to dig into Kesha's past. But when James returned with the first round of information, It hit Michael like a gut punch. Kesha Williams. 34 years old. No official birth certificate on file. Moved through 12 different foster homes until age 15. Record of abuse, multiple runaway cases. She's been living on the streets ever since, James said, his voice heavy. He paused, watching Michael closely. Mike, she has no registered family. There's no legal link to your wife at all. Michael slammed his hand against his desk, the sound echoing through the office. That's not possible, James. You saw the photo I sent you. They're the same woman. James nodded slowly. I've seen twins separated at birth before. There's usually an adoption trail, medical records, something. But this time? There's nothing. It's like someone deliberately wiped out every record of her life before she hit the system. Across town, another conversation was happening. Margaret Blackwood, Sarah's mother, was just settling in with her tea when the phone rang. Maggie, it's Helen, her sister whispered on the other end. I saw Michael. Downtown. He was talking to her. That woman. The one who looks like, you know who. Margaret froze. Her chest tightened. Helen, we promised. I know. But what if he finds out what we did 34 years ago? Margaret shut her eyes. At 71, she'd believed the past was long behind them. Sarah never knew. And Michael never must. Helen lowered her voice. What if someone finds the papers we didn't destroy? Margaret's breath caught. What papers? You said you burned everything. I kept one copy. The original birth certificate. I was afraid I might need it someday. It's been locked in my safe. Margaret gasped. Are you insane? Get it now, and burn it. Immediately. While the sisters tried to erase the past, Michael made a bold move they hadn't seen coming. He asked Kesha to take a DNA test, and even offered her $1,000 just to say yes. Why are you doing this? Kesha asked at the lab, guarded but clearly touched by his sincerity. No one's ever cared about where I come from. Michael gently squeezed her shoulder. Because everyone deserves to know who they are. And something tells me, your story is part of ours. Tommy, ever honest like only children can be, added. If you're part of Mommy's family, doesn't that mean you're family to us too? Kesha's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever said words like that to her before. For 2 decades, she had been completely forgotten by the world. But in this moment, a small boy had cracked the ice around her heart. But Margaret Blackwood wasn't about to let this unfold without interference. The very next morning, she picked up the phone and dialed Dr. Richard Harrison, chairman of Michael's company's board, and Michael's father. Richard, she said smoothly. I'm calling because I'm concerned. Michael is associating with someone troubling. A woman from the streets. He's exposing Tommy to dangerous situations. It could damage Sarah's legacy, and your company's reputation. Richard, old school and always focused on optics, didn't like the sound of that. Margaret, are you saying Michael's judgment is compromised? Could this affect investor confidence? I'm only worried about my grandson and what this could do to Sarah's name, she said. This woman is manipulating him. What Margaret didn't know was that Michael, after receiving previous threats from business rivals, had installed a full recording system in his office. Her entire call with Richard? Recorded and archived. The very next day, James called back, this time, with something far darker. Mike, he said cautiously, I got access to some restricted social services records from 34 years ago. 2 black baby girls, identical twins, were born and immediately separated. One was adopted through unofficial means, no documentation. The other ended up in the foster system. Michael's jaw tightened. Where was Sarah registered? That's the twist, James said. Sarah Blackwood was listed as informally adopted. No court paperwork. No legal process. Just handed over to the Blackwood family. Michael felt his chest tighten as the truth sank in. You're saying Margaret and Helen, they bought one baby and left the other to vanish into the system? James was quiet for a moment. Yes. And they hid it for over 3 decades. That night, Michael received the DNA results that would change all of their lives. Mike, James said gently, you might want to sit down for this. The test confirms Kesha Williams is 99.7% genetic match to Sarah's DNA, James said over the phone. They're twin sisters. Silence stretched between them like an endless void. Michael's eyes locked on the wedding photo on his nightstand. Sarah beaming with joy, standing beside her mother and Aunt Helen. All three had carried a secret so devastating. It had destroyed one life, and nearly shattered another. I want everything, James, Michael said firmly, voice low with rage. Every document. Every payment. Every scrap of proof of what they did. And install discreet cameras in Margaret's house. If she's still hiding evidence, we're going to find it. Mike, that might be considered an invasion of privacy. Michael's voice turned ice cold. They separated twin sisters, James. They left one to rot on the streets while raising the other in comfort and wealth. That's not an invasion of privacy. That's justice. While Kesha slept in the first clean bed she'd known in decades, unaware of the storm brewing around her, others were already conspiring to erase her from Michael's life, for good. What Margaret Blackwood never anticipated was that her every move, every word, and every scheme was now being watched, recorded and archived. The carefully constructed web of lies she'd woven for 34 years was on the verge of collapse. 1 week later, Michael arranged a quiet dinner at Margaret's elegant home. She believed, thanks to Dr. Harrison's pressure and her own manipulations, that Michael had finally distanced himself from Kesha. I'm so glad you've come to your senses, honey, Margaret said warmly, pouring wine in the living room, where portraits of Sarah smiled from every table. That woman was clearly disturbed, trying to exploit your grief. You're right, Michael replied calmly, watching her closely. I need to protect my family. Margaret exhaled in relief, her shoulders visibly relaxing. That's why, he added, setting a tablet down on the table. I brought something to show you. He pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room, clear as day. What if he finds out what we did 34 years ago? The wine glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the marble floor. Helen, who was visiting, went pale. How? How did you get that? Margaret asked, her hands trembling. I've had recorders in my office for months, Michael said. I didn't just catch one call. I recorded 4 conversations of you plotting to cover this up. He swiped the screen again. Helen's voice echoed next. I kept a copy of the original certificate. It's been in my safe for 34 years. Helen jumped to her feet, knocking over a chair. Margaret, you told me he'd never find out. Oh, I didn't just find the recordings, Michael said, reaching into a folder and scattering papers across the table. I found everything. He pulled out the damning evidence piece by piece. A $15,000 payment to the orphanage director, another $5,000 to forge legal documents, and 3 renewal payments on a silence agreement. Then with a hard stare he held up a yellowed birth certificate, the original. Twin girls, he said. Sarah and Kesha Williams. Margaret lunged forward, trying to snatch the documents. But Michael was faster. No. Now it's time you face the truth you buried for decades. You don't understand, Helen stammered. The pressure we were under. I understand perfectly, Michael cut in. 2 white, middle-class women decided they could choose the fate of 2 black newborns. You bought one. You abandoned the other. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Michael opened it. Kesha walked in slowly, followed by James, 3 TV reporters, and 2 civil rights attorneys. Cameras were already rolling, beaming the scene to thousands watching live. Surprise, Margaret, Michael said calmly. Kesha deserves to hear the truth from you. And now so does the world. Margaret stood frozen, the color draining from her face as she realized the weight of the moment. You can't do this, she stammered. We raised Sarah with love. We gave her a good life. Love? Kesha's voice rang out, sharper than glass. You call it love to buy one child and throw her sister away like trash? A reporter stepped forward, microphone raised. Mrs. Blackwood, how do you justify separating twin sisters? Raising one in privilege, leaving the other in poverty? Margaret's lips trembled. She looked into the camera, her reputation collapsing in real time. We were going to get her back, she began weakly. When our situation... Lies, James said firmly, interrupting the chaos. He pulled out another set of documents and held them up for the cameras. You didn't just commit a crime. You spent decades covering it up. You renewed the non-disclosure agreement 3 times, 1995, 2001, and 2007, paying a total of $45,000 to ensure Kesha would never be found. Even when she ran away at 15 and was sleeping on the streets, you still paid to keep her invisible. Helen collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing uncontrollably. I told you, Margaret. I told you to stop. It was too cruel. But you were scared. Scared she'd show up and ruin everything. Shut up, Helen. Margaret snapped, her composure completely unraveling for the first time in 71 years. Her voice cracked, her face flushed with fury. You don't know what this is going to do to us. Michael turned to the cameras. I want everyone to see who Margaret Blackwood really is. A woman who bought one baby, abandoned her twin, and spent the next 3 decades paying to keep that horror a secret. Kesha stepped forward, her expression calm and dignified despite a lifetime of pain. While Sarah grew up in mansions, went to private schools, had a family. I slept in alleys. I dug food out of trash cans. I was beaten just for existing. And all that time you knew. You always knew. Margaret tried one last desperate maneuver. Kesha, we can talk about this. Privately. I can compensate you. Compensate? Kesha laughed bitterly, shaking her head. You think money can erase 20 years of hunger? Of pain? Of being treated like garbage? Her voice hardened. I don't want your money. I want the truth. And I want the world to hear it from you. At that moment, Michael's phone buzzed. He answered it on speaker so the entire room, and the watching public, could hear. Michael, came Dr. Harrison's voice stern and clear. I just watched the live broadcast. Effective immediately, the board has agreed. Margaret Blackwood is permanently banned from any involvement in the Harrison Group. Her actions have been documented, and her attempts to manipulate you in this situation are unacceptable. You have our full support. Margaret went pale. In a matter of minutes, she had lost everything. Her reputation, her influence, access to her grandson, and her final connection to the empire Sarah had helped build. The cameras zoomed in as she sank into her chair, the weight of exposure crashing down on her. You've destroyed me, she whispered, eyes hollow. No, Kesha said, her voice steady and quiet. You destroyed yourselves. I just survived. As the scene ended, Margaret and Helen were escorted from their own home by attorneys already drafting charges. Child trafficking, document forgery, and obstruction. But the question remained. How would Tommy react when he found out he had an aunt who'd been deliberately hidden from him his whole life? And could Michael and Kesha truly rebuild a family on the ashes of such cruelty? 6 months later, Kesha Williams was barely recognizable. Not just in appearance, though proper medical care, nutrition, and a safe place to sleep had transformed her, but in spirit. Her posture, her voice, her energy all radiated power. Aunt Kesha, are you coming to my school presentation? Tommy asked over breakfast in the sunlit kitchen of their new home. I wouldn't miss it for the world, she smiled, adjusting the boy's tie. Your mother Sarah would be so proud of how brave and kind you've become. The Sarah and Kesha Williams Foundation had grown into one of the largest homelessness-focused organizations in Chicago. In just half a year, they had helped 847 people off the streets, reunited 23 families separated by the foster care system, and launched the first nationwide program to track down lost siblings. Kesha wasn't just the foundation's director. She had become the leading national voice for society's invisible people. Ms. Williams, her assistant said, entering the sleek office overlooking the city skyline. CNN confirmed tomorrow's interview. They'll focus on the bill in Congress. Also, this week's donations hit $2.3 million. Kesha nodded. Thank you. The proposed legislation, known as Kesha's Law, required adoption agencies to maintain permanent, accessible records of separated siblings. After her story went viral, the bill gained traction. 3 senators had pledged public support, and international attention followed. Corporations began approaching her for guidance on ethical reform. 3 multinational companies offered her consulting roles in designing their social impact strategies. Forbes featured her in its 30 Under 30 List of most influential social justice activists. Universities from Harvard to Oxford invited her to speak on resilience, justice, and reform. From the streets to the Senate floor, Kesha Williams was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable. Meanwhile, Margaret Blackwood faced her third criminal hearing at the Illinois State Penitentiary. The scandal had obliterated everything she once valued. Longtime friends had abandoned her. Her church expelled her. Her estate was auctioned to cover legal fines. Even Helen had disappeared, moved to another state, changed her name, and denied ever knowing her. Margaret Blackwood, the judge intoned. In addition to the 5-year sentence already imposed, this court finds you guilty of further crimes uncovered during the investigation. Tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering. He paused. You are hereby sentenced to 15 additional years without the possibility of parole. The courtroom buzzed with reporters capturing every second of her final descent. Margaret, now gray-haired and frail, barely resembled the imposing woman who once manipulated lives with a phone call. In the front row, Michael and Kesha sat silently. There was no triumph in watching her fall. Only the steady, quiet relief that justice had finally arrived after 34 long years. She looks so small now, Kesha whispered. Evil always looks smaller once it loses its power to harm, Michael replied. That night, the three of them, Michael, Kesha, and Tommy, sat down for dinner, as they did every evening. Tommy animatedly described his history presentation, Families Lost and Found, inspired by his own family's story. Kesha, now enrolled in night classes, helped him with his math homework using strategies she was learning herself. Michael watched them, amazed at how tragedy had led to this unexpected joy. In the middle of a bite, Tommy paused. Dad, can I call Aunt Kesha my second mom? Kesha's eyes brimmed with tears. After a lifetime of being discarded, she had found a family who chose her back. Of course you can, sweetheart, she said, hugging the boy who had become the child she never dared to hope for. 1 year later, Kesha stood under bright lights to receive Chicago's Heroine of the Year award. The ceremony was broadcast nationally. Her acceptance speech would go viral with over 50 million views. Margaret Blackwood believed she could decide which child deserved love, and which one could be discarded, she said, steady and composed. She thought her wealth gave her the right to play God with human lives. But what she never understood is that love cannot be bought. It cannot be destroyed by prejudice or buried by lies. I have a family today that loves me. Not out of obligation, but by choice. They love me for the woman I am, not the one she tried to erase. The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. The standing ovation lasted 4 full minutes. Margaret, watching from a prison cafeteria on a small television, finally grasped the magnitude of what she had tried, and failed, to bury. Not just Kesha's past, but her potential. Tommy grew up learning that family is built on love, not blood. Michael discovered that what is lost can make room for what truly matters. And Kesha realized that surviving invisibility had only sharpened her voice. When the world finally listened, she changed it.